Alrighty, first off, some of you may notice if you've had my other videos that I sound a little different than I usually do, and that's because I'm fighting a cold. But I have the opportunity today to get started on this hint video, and I really want to do that, so I'm going to go ahead and talk through my stuffy head and my stuffy nasally nose to get this at least started. So you're going to have to bear with me for a little while here. This picture shows the 4 1-inch by 1-inch spruce pieces that make up the top and bottom longerons for the fuselage sides. And basically all I'm showing here is that I've got them even on the front end here where the compound miter saw is, and they're supported across my table saw on back to a roller support on the other end. Now what I had elected to do was cut all 4 of these longerons the exact same size, but as you'll see later on in a video clip, I'm not sure that was the smartest thing to do, because the top longeron stays straight and the bottom longeron gets curved. So if you cut them initially like this, all at the same size, all the same length, those curved the curved lower pieces will end up being slightly shorter than the top because they're curved. But ultimately it worked out okay for me at the tail end, and like I said, that's going to be covered in a video clip later on in this video. So you may or may not want to cut them all at the same length. I did because it was easy and I didn't plan far enough ahead for the curve, but it worked out for me. So this is how I got started. So here again you see my method of jigless construction. Nothing exciting here. It's the flat countertop with the masking tape with the reference marks and the dimensions from the prints marked on them. The 4 holes in the foreground on the corner of the countertop there, those are from where my benchtop milling machine is usually mounted, but I had to remove it to get the fuselage sides built. But again, nothing exciting. I just wanted to throw this in real quick to show you how I did my sides without building an actual jig to do so. Another still shot here showing the curve, the beginning curve of the bottom of the fuselage sides. These still pictures will be a little easier to understand, I guess, coming up on a video clip, but this is just a very simple shot showing how the top longeron is held in place along the edge of the countertop, and then the bottom curved section of the longeron is just now starting to take shape, starting at the front. And I do this, I shape these kind of like I did with the wings, how I started on one end and fitted the ribs together and epoxied them in place, let them dry, and then fit a few more ribs together and walked my way from one end of the wing to the other. I'm doing the same thing here. I start at the front of the fuselage and work my way back toward the tail and gradually fit in the necessary pieces and gradually work that bottom bend into place.
So now I am starting on my fuselage, and as you can see, if you've had my other videos, I am going back to my standard of no jig and using my countertops with tape and my C-clamps and the norm. So that's my plan yet again for the fuselage. Now because the fuselage is longer than my cabinets, I have to use 2 cabinets with this space between them that you see here. Now this longeron here is in place, and what I am doing with it is, again, I'm using the edge of the countertop as a guide to keep it straight, and I have this corner here is my reference corner. And then like before, I just used the tape with the pen marks and my dimensions marked out as you see here. Now if I can get this to show up a little bit, what had happened here was this was my initial line. When you look at the prints, the dimensions on the prints are to the outside of the cap strip. And this line here represented that dimension of 22 3/4, which was one of the first uprights from the front. So if the front of the fuselage is here, you come back 10 inches and the bottom longeron gets bent to 22 3/4 of an inch distance from the top longeron. Now, since this is a tight area here, being in a corner and being underneath my cabinet, it became obvious very quickly that with this in place, I can't see this line because it's on the back side. So I just went ahead and added another piece of tape. Let me get in here better. And put a front line, a reference for the front. So now I can just bring this right up to that line this way. And I can obviously see it very easily rather than trying to see back here and make sure it's on this line. So that's what I ended up doing. I just added a front reference line to my tape pieces. Here's another one here. Same thing. This is the line with the dimension off of the print, but with everything in place I can't see the line, so I had to add another one up on front. So that's where I'm at now. I have not figured out what to do with this gap, because I think there's at least 2 cross members that go somewhere in here, and I have to figure out how to support them long enough for the epoxy to dry. But I'm not there yet. This is just a preliminary setup, and I'm doing it like I had done all the other ones, just using my countertops and some tape, and we'll see how it goes. So this is where I'm at, starting day 2 of building my fuselage. A couple of things I want to point out. First of all, the little weights, such as this here and those little silver ones down there, those are no more than just to keep the wood itself down onto the table. With this bend being in here, there's a little bit of stress on the wood, and I didn't want it to come flipping out this way. So these are just on here to help hold the wood down in place. I'll explain a little bit what I have going on so far. None of this was really planned ahead of time. I'm just kind of walking my way through it as I go. And so far, here's what I've come up with. Again, this is the top longeron, however you pronounce it. And it's pretty much evened up with the edge of my countertop. And it comes all the way across, spans the gap here where I don't have any counter, and comes across to this other counter here. So this piece is the top piece, which is straight, and then this is the bottom piece here, which gets the curve. Now, what I had done was, using the prints obviously for the locations, I had marked with a pencil where the different supports go that tie the top longeron to the bottom longeron. And the arrow represents on which side of the line the wood piece goes. So in this particular location, the cross brace would go on this side of the line. It wouldn't go back here, it would go here. You have to pay real close attention to that on the prints, because if you look closely, you'll see on which side of the reference lines those cross braces go. So that's what these lines represent, and I've got the different locations marked all across this piece. If I come across here, here's one that I actually have in place, and you can maybe sort of make out the line here. And then I've got the next one up as well here. And then for the bottom, I just use my my marks with the tape that you see here. Here's my reference mark, and I transferred that line up onto the wood just like I did the front, the top longeron, and then put my piece in place again with an arrow to represent on which side of the line the wood needs to be. It's not on this side. And then again the wax paper, so that when I do go to epoxy this in place, none of these are epoxy, they're just laying in here. I got my wax paper here for when these get epoxied, so the epoxy doesn't stick to my counter. I have my reference line here to keep the front ends of both of these pieces on the same plane. This is my spacer block to keep this from pushing in. This is my spacer block here to maintain the dimension from this piece to this piece. And then I started with this cross member here, which is the longest one of all of them for the sides of the fuselage. So with these blocks here, this block holding this end at the correct dimension and this block holding it in the correct dimension, I was able to take this piece, stick it in here, and bend this back this way, bend this out, and get it on my reference line that I have drawn under here, which is now covered up with a piece of plywood and wax paper. So using my tape, which I believe I had showed earlier, I've made my reference marks with pen on the tape, and then I just push this piece back until that reference line lined up with the end of with the edge of the wood, and then cut this piece to fit to maintain that spacing between these two. And since this is the longest piece, it has the most stress on it. And then as I work my way forward, I come to this piece and do the same thing, just keep cutting it and tweaking it until this longeron lies on my reference point, on my reference mark. I don't know if you can see that. And then I will continue to do that going backwards as I come back here to the next one, which is here. Here's what I'm talking about. Here are my lines. And if I take a square, which I don't have handy, of course, hold on. I'm going to drag you back this way with me. Grab my little square here. I have my reference line here on the tape, which represents the distance from this piece to this piece. And then if I put a square on that up against the end of the board, see I'm flush with the wood, it comes down right onto that reference line, which is blurry, of course, because I can't manually change the settings every time I come in and out with this camera. So the face of this board here is even with my reference line here. And then of course I have my block here to keep the spacing correct from here to here. And then I've got my vertical here drawn out for where the board needs to go, with the arrow to remind me that the cross brace has to be on this side of the line. And I'll just come in here again, if I can get this back far enough, and I'll put in my piece of wood from here to here. And I'll just keep working my way back, and then I'll start putting in the diagonal pieces that run through here, the various ways that they crisscross. And while I'm doing this, every time I make a piece for this side, I make an exact duplicate for the other side. So I've already got 2 of these made, and I've got 2 of these made, cut to the same length, cut to the correct angles on both ends. So when it comes time to build the other side, it should go a lot faster because most of the components will already be cut. The other thing that I wanted to make note of, I have, as I said, I have the locations marked for where the braces need to go between the 2 longerons. I have a C-clamp at each of those locations, especially on this longest piece here, because this one has the most stress. This piece here right now is pretty much the only piece that's putting this bend in here for me. So this one has all the stress on it. This top longeron needs to stay straight. It can't bow under the pressure of this. So I've got a good size C-clamp at each location. Here's another one here. so that it will stay nice and straight, hold this piece in place nice and tight, and allow this cross brace to do the bending for me. So that's why I've got the C-clamps the way that I have them in the locations that I have them, to keep this longeron straight, and then I let those cross members push on the bottom piece to give me my angle, and then I just make sure that the faces of this line up with my reference lines, as well as the locations for the cross members. And I just work my way back, all the way back to the tail, get everything cut, and then I'll come back and I'll epoxy them in. I'll remove them one at a time and then put them back in with epoxy, and do the same process again with epoxy. So let me continue on and get some more braces and stuff in place, and I'll come back and talk to you some more. Okay, so this is roughly day 3 of my first side of my fuselage. I'm starting to put in the cross braces and the different supports. The big thing to pay attention with these, they are different sizes depending on the location on the plane. Most of these front pieces are 1 by 7/8. However, this front one is 1 by 3/4. These are 1 by 7/8. All of these until you get to here, and this one is 1 by 3/4, and if I remember correctly, the rest of these are 1 by 3/4. These I know are for sure these, but the cross pieces that go between here are also 1 by 3/4, and those dimensions are on the print, but make sure you get the right size pieces of wood in the right locations. So that's what I'm working on now, are the braces, and then I did the same kind of joints as I did on my ribs. If you have that DVD, I do it with the multiple angles on the ends, so this piece will bear up against this one and this one, as opposed to just laying on this one by itself. It gives you more gluing surface. So that's where I'm at. It's kind of a slow process, especially with doing the joints this way, because you have to get these multiple angles cut at both ends, like this. And of course you have to get it to fit, so that takes a little bit of fooling around. And then my solution for across here was nothing more than put these braces in and then clamp them across this way to hold them in place, rather than building something to support it here. I'm confident enough that these 1 inch by 1 inch longerons, they're not going to sag or droop or bow or get funny across the span from here to here. It's not a big enough span for this thing, for this to start acting funny and get all wavy or anything like that. So with it being clamped here and clamped over on the other side, I'm confident that this is nice and straight. When I look down at, with my eyeball, it looks fine, so I'm comfortable with it. So I'm going to continue on gluing these pieces together, and then we'll see what happens next.
This picture represents my simple solution to having cross members in that empty span between the countertops. I just used a scrap piece of 1/16 inch plywood, and I put a piece of wax paper on top of it underneath the joint so the epoxy won't stick, and went ahead and just clamped it to the longeron and left enough of the plywood sticking out so that the pieces that I'm joining to the longeron can rest on it as well. So I don't think I need to explain anything else. I think the picture is kind of speaks for itself. So just clamp on a piece of plywood and lay your pieces that you're going to attach to the longeron right on top as well, like you see here. Here is another adjoining piece. This is a diagonal cross member put in place, again resting on the same clamped on plywood, and it's got the two different angle cuts on the end, which is the way that I chose to do the majority of my cuts, just like I had done on the wing ribs. So again, nothing too exciting, just a simple picture showing how I went ahead and remedied my my small problem of not having countertop underneath the whole entire fuselage. I just incorporated this plywood brace, so to speak, and that's it. Simple and clean, ready to go. This next series of photographs demonstrates how I chose to do some of the filler blocks that are required for some of these fuselage joints. If you look on the plans specify where to stick in reinforcement wedges for things like the landing gear brackets and stuff like that. So the way that I decided to do mine was to make the gusset for the joints first, and then lay the gussets over the joint and outline the gusset with a pencil. And then I would go back with a bigger piece of wood and cut the angle required for the wedge, and then stick that down into the location where it's going to need to be, and then mark a line across that wedge where it needs to ultimately be cut off. So I have done that, and in this picture coming up here, you can see that wedge that has been cut to the proper angle, cut to the proper length, and it now fits in where it's supposed to be. And you can see the pencil marks where the gusset is going to end up being. So everything is a nice clean package, so to speak. And I think this particular location, I think this is the front landing gear location for the landing gear bracket. And then the other thing that I had done, since I was making a lot of wedges, and I was I'm not sure, but I think I made the wedges for both fuselage sides at the same time, but I'm not sure. But anyway, I labeled each location just so I wouldn't get the wedges messed up. So that's what all the little A's represent here. And you can see on the right hand side there's another wedge that had been added. And then here is the gusset itself, temporarily in place. As I said, I start with the gusset. I cut the gusset to the size that you see here, and then I trace it out onto the wood pieces that are already in place, and then I can remove that gusset, and those pencil lines tell me exactly what size the wedges need to be made into. And then this is just another picture here that shows the same joint location from a different angle. And again, I just mark my gussets. I keep my gussets labeled because I usually make the gussets. If I start working with the thin plywood, I'll try to make as many gussets as I can. And of course, on the fuselage, they're all different sizes and shapes, so I just label them. Label the joint that they correspond to, and then I label the wedges that need to go into that joint as well. Here is a picture with almost my full complement of support staff. This picture's missing our one little furry member, but I believe I've got him in another picture coming up here somewhere else in the video. But this is one side of the fuselage complete with the gussets in the proper locations. There are gussets where they need to be, and there are no gussets where that large plywood sheeting is going to be applied later. Now there has been some discussion on when to put the plywood sheeting on the sides of the fuselage, and I chose not to apply the sheet anytime soon, to be frank. The reason for that is the fuselage sides, they bend toward each other as you work your way back to the tail, and I thought having the plywood sheeting on would just make it that much more difficult to fool with. Of course, that sheet only goes back to the back of the pilot's seat, but the fuselage does start to bend a little ahead of that, and I didn't want the plywood sheeting making it more difficult for me. And then the biggest, most obvious reason for me not to do it was the fact that when I'm actually building the fuselage and I start working on the seat structures, I start working on putting in the controls and putting in the control cables for the rudder and for the stick and all that stuff, it would be a heck of a lot easier if I can just reach through the side of the fuselage, since there's no plywood in the way, rather than always having to work from rather than reaching over the top and down into it. I can just reach right through the sides. And that's the way I have been doing it, and it's been very, very, very simple and nice.
Hey everybody, just wanted to say real quick again, thanks for checking out my YouTube videos, and just a couple of real quick tidbits before you leave. If you'd be so kind as to check out my GoFundMe page, the link is down in the description of these videos. For those of you who find it in your heart to donate for this new cause of mine, I've got another project going on, and there's some really cool things I'd like to do with this aircraft, and again, that's all explained in my GoFundMe. But if you find moved enough to go do that and donate, I've got this horizontal stabilizer skin, and donors will get their name put on this skin, and ultimately when this gets filled and the aircraft gets finished, this is going to be hung up on the wall of honor in my hangar. Just a little bit of recognition for those donors who helped make the project a reality. Another thing too is, I'm sure you've noticed that even this video that I'm making right now is of the same or worse quality than the video that you just watched, and that's because, believe it or not, this camera is the exact same camera that I filmed the original hint videos with. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm not really sure why, but I know the video quality lacks, but hopefully the information within is worth something. And the other thing that I wanted to mention real quick is, again, these are little snippets from my hint video DVDs, so a lot of these individual clips just kind of come to an abrupt end. That's just the way it is when I'm trying to rip these DVDs apart and re-edit them into small little segments, and they just kind of end weird at times. But that's it. That's all I wanted to say. And again, thanks, and I hope you'll come back, check out my channel, and see if there are any new videos and updates. All right, I'll talk to you then. See you.